I'll call the meeting to order at 4:35 p.m. today of the Winchester School Committee. With that, my agenda just disappeared. So hang on one second. There you go. Great.
It's up on the screen.
And it's the same agenda, so that's good. Great. Welcome everyone. Our first agenda item is public comment. And I seem to recall from that last screen before it went away that there was no one waiting. Can anyone who can see it let me know if there's anyone?
Just
we have nobody.
Nobody there.
All right. Well, then we'll close public comment and move on to superintendent and chair reports. And having just come back to town, I don't have a whole lot new to report myself. So I will hand it over to Dr. Hackett.
So as I shared with you already, I get called for jury duty today and spent the day at Suffolk Superior Court, and come at the end of it, 3:30 or so, I found out that I didn't have to serve. So it was a long day, and I would love to serve, but at some point, but I'm a little bit relieved. So we also wanted to update you, just let you know that we're pretty much fully moved into Lincoln now. So we are at the ground level of Lincoln. That would be our special education director in support, my office in support, Jen, Ellen, Emma, Lori Kirby, and their support, and Heather Gary as well. And then the remainder currently are at the business office. So, I'm sorry, in the business office at the high school, that has been true for a bit. So we have been successful in our hiring of a new registration person, central registration person. We're pretty excited about that. She's coming along pretty quickly. Aaron has been training her for the last week or so. And we were also successful in hiring an accounting manager. And we were very fortunate to get Michelle Kingdon. She is currently working in the Medford School Department. I wanted to say Melrose. Medford School Department. She has worked for the town of Medford. She's worked for the city of Newton. She has had both town and school-based accounting experience, highly qualified. We're fortunate that she actually does live in Winchester, and she was looking for a change. So she'll be starting and coming on board. I know Andrew is probably even more excited than I am. I believe, Andrew, late August, early September?
Early September, yep.
Okay. Anything else I'm missing, Andrew, just quickly for?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds good.
All right. Okay. That's
Great.
it.
Well, it sounds like a great hire. Certainly a very important need in our department. So congratulations on that. Let's move on to our consent agenda for our 23-24 meeting dates, ratification of minutes, and disposal of a Parkhurst school fuel tank. If we can, since it's all on a consent agenda, unless people have questions or want to look into, does anyone want to take anything off the consent agenda, or can we just vote the agenda? I'm seeing nodding heads.
Happy to make a motion to approve it as listed.
Second.
Great. So we'll have to do a roll call vote, and we'll give Mr. Nixon a little bit of time because he's driving. So be careful, Mr. Nixon. Mr. Brady.
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom.
Aye.
Ms. Volnese.
Aye.
Mr. Nixon.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. So the consent agenda passes. Next item on our agenda, we go down to our reports and action items. And the first one is consideration of approval of policy EDE, Winchester Public Schools recycling policy that we heard about at our prior meeting. Ms. Volnese, do you have anything you want to say about this? Maybe we don't need to since we covered it last meeting, but give you the opportunity.
I think we had already discussed it at the June 13th meeting. So if there are any further questions, I had already gotten a few questions, which I had spoken with individuals about. So I am I have nothing further to say.
Great. Any questions or discussion on the committee? Anyone want to make a motion?
No, just thank everybody for their work, because I know this was collaboration between town entities and school entities, and it was some work to update this and to try to bring us forward with recycling policies. So thank you to the people who spent some time working on this. I believe that was Seamus and Karen. And Karen, who did you work with on the town side?
Pardon me?
Who did you work with on the town side?
Oh,
Fritz
so
and-
Fritzy Nace and Ken Pruitt have both participated in the meetings, as had Andrew Marin, who I would say we're very indebted to him for his work in pulling together an update to this policy.
Yeah, thank you to
Thanks to all of
everybody
them.
who worked on this. It's great. Happy to make a motion to approve it as written.
And second,
All in favor, Mr. Brady,
I,
Ms. Bergstrom,
Aye.
Ms. Bonace,
aye.
Mr. Nixon.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, and so the recycling policy passes, and thank you to everyone involved. That's a very important part of our sustainability efforts, and which we'll be discussing more at future meetings later on in the summer. Next is our update and consideration of capital priorities. Dr. Hackett, do you want to set any of that up, or I'll turn it to you, Dr. Hackett, and then you can send it if you want off to Mr. Nixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to kind of start off, the capital planning project, or the capital project priority process with the town capital planning committee is, I think, familiar to all of you. It has been in place for quite some time. I was thinking today, it's actually on my second time going through this process, which seems kind of, I don't know, I feel like I've been here longer than that, but and we've worked hard with, as we usually do, we've coordinated with Pete Lawson from the town facilities. Andrew has been in regular and have met often with Pete. We've met as your representative, Mr. Nixon, on the on that committee as well. And we wanted to just present to you kind of two things. What I'd like to do, I'm going to let Chris talk a little bit about the process itself, because he's definitely more familiar with it, and he could talk a little bit about our recommendations for our priorities. And then we also put together just a few slides just to kind of information, kind of basic facts, information that we pulled out of the master plan, because it felt like it was a good place to put kind of generally when were our buildings built, what were some of the renovations that have been done, just trying to bring some of the story forward from the master plan. So with that, Mr. Nixon, are you good to go?
Well, I'm happily now getting on 495, and I'm going to be on it for like 23 miles. So I can, I don't have to divide my time between school committee and Google Maps anymore. I'm just a fish in the stream at this point. So I'm happy to, a few remarks. And again, I apologize to the committee and others watching. I find myself in Central Mass tonight helping out one of my kiddos. So that was not my plan, but it's where I am. And if I miss something, I would ask, both Dr. Hackett or Mr. Marin to jump in. Feel free. I think our plan tonight to the committee this afternoon was to touch on just very briefly these two recommendations for FY25, but then we're going to circle back to them later in the discussion in more detail. I think Andrew and Frank have put together some slides that we'll go through kind of in order, even for buildings where there are no recommendations for FY25. I think some members were interested in just kind of getting a little bit of history of where we've been and where we are. So I haven't seen these slides myself. I'm sure they're great. So the two and I'm also just going to refer back to a memo that I think everybody got a couple of days ago. I think actually 3 days ago on the 17th. There are two recommendations for FY25 capital cycle priorities for the school committee, and they are the Lincoln flat work and site work reconstruction, demolition, reconstruction. We reviewed that in quite a bit of detail in February. You may recall we actually looked at the site, the landscape design, and so forth. So that would be a priority, and our recommended funding level is $1.5 million. And we'll talk more about that again when we get to it. And then the second suggestion is to actually move forward on replacing the roof on the carriage house. This is an interesting one. DPW has for at least 5, maybe more years in a row, requested funding to complete a set of bid documents to replace the roof at the carriage house. They actually withdrew that request when we were moving forward with the design development for the central office project at the carriage house that everybody remembers. Now that, of course, that project was not funded by town meeting. And of course, any renovation of the carriage house would have included a new roof. So now that that project is not moving forward, it is an asset of the district, and we're sort of circling back to get a roof on that building because portions of it are leaking, and so it's really just about preserving the asset. I think we can start moving on to the other slides if Frank and Andrew, if you're okay with that, but feel free to jump in if I miss anything.
Nope, sounds good. We are on Ambrose.
Okay. So Ambrose, there are, and I'm driving, so I'm not going to read the slide, but you all can. There are no FY25 capital recommendations for Ambrose, but as you all may remember, and we make mention in the memo, we had actually requested funding for some pretty detailed evaluation and a schematic design package for roof replacement at both Ambrose and McCall. We requested that at fall town meeting. We got kind of half a loaf, or we got half of a loaf and the town took another half of somebody else's loaf. Capital was interested in funding that work. Town management, however, thought it was wiser to take that $150,000 and actually spread it over 4 buildings. So to also evaluate town hall and the public library. And I'm sure you're well aware those 2 buildings have very different roofs. Those are slate roofs, they're pitched. They are nothing like the flat membrane roofs that we have at most of our schools. So that's what was actually funded at fall town meeting. In that discussion, we had also talked about including some preliminary structural and solar evaluation for the roof at Ambrose. We had a lot of discussion back in the spring of 15 about putting solar panels on Ambrose, but we opted not to do it just given the age of the roof. So as you all know, we talked about this, I think in April or May. If we were to replace the roof at Ambrose, I think it's really important for the committee to come out strongly and say whether we want solar up there or not. And so we had discussed, as a committee, I think it was in May, that we might be bringing forward to you all to consider as a capital project request, a structural analysis of the roof at Ambrose, which can be done by the original structural engineer who's actually working with us on the Lynch project. So that's great. Same engineer actually who also engineered VO. And then with that analysis in hand, that tells us kind of what the dead load capacity is up there at Ambrose. We didn't give that information to a solar engineer who could then look at the roof, look at where, for instance, penetrations are, other roof equipment, kind of do a layout and tell us what kind of power generation we might reasonably expect. And then in addition to that, a couple of funding options. So, if we wanted to direct purchase with cost and to enter into a PPA, what kind of discount might we get? So that was all going to be really useful information so long as the school committee has interest in solar up there. It seemed like we do, but we need more information. So there's a reason why just such an evaluation is actually not on the recommended list, and it's good news. The fee came in, the fee is well under $35,000. We've been assured of that. So it's simply not eligible for capital planning's consideration. I should just reiterate for everybody who's not aware, for many years there was a $25,000 value threshold for capital projects being submitted for all departments. That number had been in place for many, many years, going back to before I got on capital, I think even before I got on school committee. So just given the cost of inflation and escalation, about 2 years ago, we decided to raise that limit for schools and for a couple of other departments. For others, small departments like Board of Health and Town Clerk, I think they still have a $25,000 threshold, but they really don't make very many requests. So for the schools and for DPW for buildings, it's a $35,000 threshold. So it's simply not enough cost to warrant a capital review. But the cost is low enough that Dr. Hackett, Mr. Marin are evaluating some options to just fund it directly with district funds so we can get that going. And what that means is that exercise will frankly be ahead of schedule. We don't have a date for this yet, but it's entirely possible we might actually have some information in time for this mid-August capital project summit with the select board. Whether we hit that date or not, whatever information comes forward, I fully expect would still be shared with the school committee first, since we're the ones that are asking for it. So that's a mouthful there. I'm reluctant to say much. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, Mr. Brady has a question, his hand raised, as does Ms. Bergstrom.
Thanks.
Mr. Brady.
Just a quick question. Ambrose was built in early 2006. Just when, the building, as I understand it, was previously another school. Is that correct?
It was. There was an Ambrose school there. Actually, a very divisive community debate about whether to renovate it or tear it down, and ultimately it came down. So yes, Ambrose was built from basically 2005 to 2006. The roof that's there today is, approaching 18 years old.
Sorry, no, I'm just getting at when was
Nothing
the
remained
building
from the
before
original.
that built?
Broke up. There was a
Say that again, Mr.
Catholic
Brady?
school on the site, Seamus.
Yeah, I'm curious about when that building was built and renovated. I'm just for the timeline. And it's fine if you don't have that handy. We can figure that out later.
Well,
So,
my
Mr.
brother went to that Catholic school way back in the 50s.
So, Mr. Nixon, the questions, do you know when the prior Ambrose school was built?
Or rather, when it was kind of last renovated, because I know it was built a long, long time ago.
I honestly don't. So the answer is no, I don't. But I think if you Google Ambrose Elementary reconstruction debate Winchester and throw in like the year 2003 or 2004, you'll probably find some articles online about it, and then it might give you that information.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bergstrom.
So Chris, I see the $35,000 for the roof structural and solar assessment, but I also thought I remembered, and I thought I heard you say that town meeting appropriated $150,000 to assess Ambrose and McCall. So I guess I'm wondering how town hall has the authority to split that into 4 roofs then, and if they hadn't, wouldn't we have been able to do that out of the original $150,000 appropriation?
Yeah, so you broke up on me a little bit, but I think I got the gist of your question. We originally were asking for 150 for that schematic design for the 2 school routes. That was our request. Once we had put in that request, and we were beginning to talk about things, for instance, like solar at Lynch, there was some follow-up conversation with school committee and with administration about whether it made sense to explore solar at Ambrose, particularly given that we've been asked to look at a PPA before. So it was actually when it was already on the table with capital and we were discussing the project, it was capital planning actually did make the request of town management that we actually evaluate the solar piece. And in fact, the expectation, Ms. Bergstrom, was I believe capital even intended to kick in a little extra money for it. I can't really explain why that did not happen. I did not understand until February. So that evaluation was funded in the fall. I believe in February it actually hadn't even been awarded yet. Engineering and planning and others, they got very full plates. Not the least of which is the Lynch project, but the project got, I think, advertised a little late, and somehow that expectation got lost. So the But however, the money that was appropriated by town meeting absolutely was spent towards existing condition evaluations and some recommendations. So that I'm kind of calling it a conceptual, it's an existing condition evaluation and kind of conceptual roof report. Did actually come in. I saw it just yesterday. It is very high level. It is helpful. I want to be clear. It is helpful in that it gives us an idea of the existing condition. There is some let's say statements around priority at both schools. It answers some questions. It leaves other questions unanswered. And you won't be surprised to hear me say it. If anything, it actually generates more questions. And in the case in McCall, it even suggests there may be some masonry demolition work that needs to happen before there's any roof work done. So it is helpful. I want to be very clear. It's helpful stuff, but for whatever reason, and I can't explain, that structural analysis and the solar piece was never done. But I also want to be clear, when we talked about this in May, we were anticipating that the structural analysis and the solar conceptual design and, the modeling for generation and so forth, we were expecting that it might actually be $35,000. It's not. And that's so that's the good news. It's going to be substantially below that.
I guess I'm trying to understand. I thought the money, the 150 was appropriated for Ambrose and McCall, but if it was used beyond the scope of that, I would expect the $35,000 then to come out of town hall, not out of our own budget.
So I understand.
If they chose to use the 150 in a way other than it was originally intended and appropriated, then I would expect that 35 that we still need, that could have come out of that one. If we had 75 per roof, we could have.
I follow you. I follow you. If you go back, so if you look back to the memo that was sent, I think it was actually the memo that we were discussing in May, the May or June memo. There's actually an excerpt there, Ms. Bergstrom, of the motion from fall town meeting itself. And in fact, town hall and the library, the warrant. So that was, and again, I can't speak to how the sausage gets made, but capital planning by charter, we make recommendations to the town manager at the end of the day. We do have authority to put articles on the warrant, but when we rank projects, when we define projects, those are, at the end of the day, a recommendation to the town manager. So the town manager does have some, I would say, authority to make adjustments as he, or in this case, she sees fit. So if you look backwards, I think you'll find that the article actually did say McCall, Ambrose, the library, and town hall. So no funny business there, I can say.
Okay, I just want to make sure that it did include the other two buildings, so I will go back and take a look, because my understanding as a town meeting member is we were voting for Ambrose and McCall.
Yeah, well, we can go back and look. I did, and I don't know if Dr. Hackett or Andrew even want to look that up, but there's an excerpt of that in one of the recent memos that you've received from me on capital projects, and it was either in May or June, and I literally copied and pasted from the warrant. So I do think it's in there, but we can figure that out.
Okay. I just want to make sure before it comes out of our budget, because under $35,000 isn't a lot, but it's still $35,000.
Well, I agree. And again, it's going to be substantially less than that, but your point is well taken. I mean, even if it's 10 grand, it's still 10 grand.
Right.
I understand it. I don't disagree with you.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
And to answer my own question, in 1948, Mary Cliff Academy was built, and it was converted in 1969 when the town purchased it.
And there you go. Cool.
So is that all we have on Ambrose?
Well, that's all I wanted to. That's really, I think, all we needed to talk about. I'm going to defer to Frank and Andrew, though. Do we should we take a moment to sort of talk about a little more generally about what the roofing report has told us about Ambrose? You want to save that for later? I mean, we can certainly take a moment to do that.
I think it would be good, Chris, just to give the high level, because that's obviously what we did receive, and we just received
Sure.
it today or yesterday.
Yeah.
So it's very
so
draft form too, just as a caveat.
It is. It's very, very draft. And it even says so. It's a very conceptual report. It includes all 4 buildings. The engineer is under such a gun that the only buildings that include estimates are actually Ambrose and McCall. So they don't even have numbers pulled together yet for Town Hall or the library. So with respect to Ambrose, here's the quick summary. There are only 2 very, very small portions of roof at Ambrose that they believe require replacement. They are, I can't, it's hard for me to describe what they are. I believe one of them may be the overrun for the elevator, but these are such small pieces. They could be like 10 by 12, 12 by 14. We're talking about just very, very small portions of the roof that, rise above the other larger planes of the roof. The rest of the roof at Ambrose, they say, actually doesn't need to be replaced. It can be repaired. And the cost of doing all of that is a little under $750,000. I think it was around 732, Andrew, something like that. But so I'll just put a pin in that and say, in terms of what it needs now, very, very little replacement and a lot of repair. By the way, that's very similar to what we just did at Morocco as part of the life extension plan. There were 2 areas of roof at Morocco, although more than what's being suggested at Ambrose, but there were 2 roof planes at Morocco that just got replaced last year, and the rest of it was repair. We did that, remember, because we're not interested in a 30-year roof at Morocco. We specifically said we wanted to make whatever investments are necessary to extend the life of that building 8 to 10 years until we have a replacement. So we were very strategic in that regard. Any suggestion towards limited replacement and a lot of repair at Ambrose raises questions. One of which is, well, if we do that, how much more life are we getting out of the roof? That would be my question. And then remember, the roof's 18 years old. We certainly expect roofs to last longer than 18 years. But when they're 18 years old, it's absolutely the right time to start evaluating them, thinking about what it's going to cost to replace them, how we're going to pay for it. So at the other end of the spectrum, and I'm going to put Andrew on the spot, I believe the total replacement cost, if we replaced everything, is around $3.2 million, which is a bit of a relief to me because when Ms. Bergstrom will remember this, back in, was it January or February, the chair of the select board was asking Capital to come up with a list of projects that it might want to fund if the select board were to come up with billions of dollars in free cash. And I think Ms. Bergstrom explained this to the school committee at the time. The Ambrose project was that list. There were specific questions from the select board. What would Ambrose cost? Well, of course, we had no idea, but what we said, when I say we, I mean Mr. McPeak and I said to the select board, you should assume at least $3 million. So we're breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief because at least we don't look like we're stupid, but the number comes in at 3.2. The elephant in the room is the engineer is saying, well, you don't really need to replace all this right now. But if you did, it'd be $3.2 million. So what's interesting about this, in my mind, what's interesting and valuable about the report is it triggers other questions. For instance, well, if the roof doesn't really need to be replaced right now, let's say we want to replace it in FY 28. Like, instead of putting $750,000 into it to get 10 more years out of it, how much money do we need to put into it to get 6 years out of it? Because that would be like a good life of a roof, and then we could plan on a replacement. And if the school committee wanted to put solar panels on the roof, that builds plenty of runway for us to figure out how much solar can we put up there and what would that cost. So this is a perfect example of how the report kind of says 2 different things about the roof. Doesn't necessarily describe it doesn't necessarily answer all of our questions, but it's helpful. So I guess there you go. If we were going to do something now, the recommendation is not to replace the roof except for two very, very small pieces and do a lot of repair, $250,000. If we were going to replace the whole thing now, which they say we don't need to, it's like 3.2. So that's my sum. Did I leave anything out, Andrew?
No, that's accurate. 3.2 is correct for to replace all.
So Ms. Bolognese has a question. Ms. Bolognese? And you're on mute. Yeah, there you go.
So I thought one of the things that was going to come out of the report was prioritizing either Ambrose or McCall's roof. And did we get any indication or inkling from that?
I'll give you a cliffhanger and say, look, we'll talk about that when we get to the McCall slide. How about that?
Jumping ahead.
But we will get there.
Ms. Bergstrom?
So Mr. Nixon, I was able to locate the article from town meeting, and it does indicate a schematic level design. It does indicate all 4 roofs, but that we were supposed to get schematic design actually out of this article.
Yeah, well, like I said, we had asked for schematic design for Ambrose and McCall for 150, and I think that was a very reasonable amount of funding. Then management really felt strongly that they wanted to add 2 more buildings into that. Like
right?
We often
Does that
say,
not change?
I'm just going to finish by saying, you get what you pay for, right? So 150 will go so far for 1 building, it'll go farther for 2, it'll go half as far for 2, and it'll go not as far for 4. So I guess that's all I could say about it. And you could certainly reach out to the town manager or to Dr. Hackett, Mr. Marin for maybe further conversation about kind of how that happened and why. But like I said, we make recommendations to the town manager, and the town manager made that decision to modify the article, and that's what came to town meeting. And what we got is helpful. I really do want to underscore it. It's a helpful report, just not as detailed as kind of what we were hoping for a year ago.
Well, and nor what the intent of the warrant article was. So I just want to keep track of that, because then if we have to return to town meeting and ask for schematic design for the Ambrose or McCall roof, I am certain somebody will say, we already gave you money for that. So I just want to be clear that it wasn't our decision to move from schematic level design to assessment. That the intent of, I think when we spoke with Capital, the intent of the school committee and it sounds like the Capital committee was to get a schematic level design. So if that simply changed to an assessment at the town meeting level or at the town hall level, then that's, as you said, something that they'll have to be able to explain.
Well, and you're quite right. There are quite a few eagle-eyed members of town meeting who might ask that question. So it's a point well taken. I think it's good to kind of have an explanation for that, Andy. So shall we move on to the next slide?
It's, Lincoln is up now.
Lincoln. Okay, so Lincoln, and obviously, so this is our #1 recommended priority for this capital cycle. It will be familiar to you all because it was a priority last year, and that is to actually complete the bid documents. We're nearly shovel ready, and actually do the work at Lincoln to basically demolish, to rip up and replace all the flat work and the site work that is failing, it's crumbling, it's sinking. We did discuss this in some detail in February, and I'll remind the committee, we're not looking to tear out and rebuild exactly everything as it sits today. We're looking to actually simplify some of the site circulation a little bit, and in doing so, we manage the scope of this. One of the helpful aspects of this is that there's an opportunity to create, as you face not the elevation you're seeing now, but the main elevation that kind of faces the library and the pond, faces Mystic Valley Parkway. There's an opportunity to actually kind of create an outdoor classroom space that could be used certainly during instructional time and maybe even monitored during recess. And that was seen by the building-based administration as something that would be really helpful because, as we're all aware, we space is in short supply, site is in short supply, a lot of little feet running around, and that's what, you know, destroys the grass, because we got too many feet running around for the grass to make it. So we requested last year, we went to Capital and we said, we think it's going to cost between 1.1 and 1.2. That was based on an estimate, but that estimate was based on earlier kind of like 50% design development drawings. After, and so we ranked this, and I should also just back up and say Capital has certainly been supportive of the project. I mean, the reason we're even at this stage with near construction documents is because Capital and town meeting have actually supported, you know, the site evaluation, the conceptual design, and then developing this more detailed package. And this is kind of how we do things at Capital. You know, we take one thing one step at a time. It's actually just like what we've done at McCall, where the facade restoration work is happening now, which is really exciting. That there was a three-step process. It started off as just an evaluation, and then along with some conceptual recommendations, and then we sought money to move it forward and come up with bid documents and a more detailed estimate. And then when that happened, then we went and we asked for $825,000 to do the work. And the good news is we got 825 grand, and it came in under budget. So hopefully we're not going to get any surprises, and we'll be able to turn some money back to the town. So this is very similar then by comparison. The reason we're asking for 1.5, and I did get a question from a committee member about this, is that after Capital had actually ranked last year, and we knew that it had not, it fell like 2 projects short. I mean, you know, there's a line based on the funding we have in the stabilization fund and other competing priorities. So there's always a line every year. Projects above the line, they go to town meeting. Projects below the line, they don't, and they have to wait, you know, another year for consideration. This project was, I think, 2 spots below the line, but at the end of that whole ranking process, we actually did get an updated estimate based on more advanced drawings, and the estimate came in at $1.4 million. Now, we did sit down with engineering and planning. We went over that detailed estimate with the engineer. There was some extra scope that was carried in there, particularly around, you know, excavation and fill and so forth. There was some scope and some cost in that estimate that did not need to be there. And so we highlighted that, so that would presumably bring the number down. But on the other hand, this estimate is like, what, 11 months old or something. And as we all know from our Lynch conversations, we're interested in and we're concerned about, and we recognize just the cost of escalation. So the 1.5, which has been reviewed with engineering and planning, is seen as a reasonable number to seek to do the work. It is based on that last round of drawings and that $1.4 million estimate that came in very late last summer. And I don't know, Andrew, are there more pictures here on Lincoln that we talk about now, or do you want to come back and talk about that later? There were some images that were in the memo you guys got a couple of days ago.
Yep. Yeah, we can
okay.
put those here.
Okay, so this is great. Some of these images you may remember from the most recent memo you got. I love this slide because what you're looking at on the left is what one of the knee walls and stairways looked like in August last year. And that is the exact same spot 3 days ago. Nothing's really been fixed, but what DPW does, and they've been doing this for frankly years now, they go out in the summer and do their best to literally patch things up, make it look nice. This is not repair. They're putting patches on top of patches. I guarantee you by February, half of all that patch put down, it'll be gone. And if you guys, or if you look carefully in the pictures that were in the memo you got the other day, there are literally patches on top of patches at Lincoln. And the most recent work is already beginning to crack. This is not that image on the left, I think is a good example. This is, I want to really underscore this for, you know, anybody who's listening in the public. This is not a workmanship issue on the part of DPW. The building itself is in great shape. It was renovated top to bottom back in 99 and 2000. It's beautiful. There were a number of disputes on the project. Subcontractors litigated against the general contractor. Some subcontractors walked off the site. I believe a couple went bankrupt. And as Pete, finally determined about 3 or 4 years ago, some of this flat work was never properly installed. To pour a concrete sidewalk or steps, you need to excavate, you need to compact the ground, you put down a gravel subbase, you literally build a foundation, if you will, to support the concrete. And in most cases, that did not happen. It appears the contractor literally poured concrete right on top of loom. It would just be like you deciding to pour concrete in your backyard. And if you did that, you would find it would be cracking in a year or two. And so that's what's happening here. It's really unfortunate, but that's our reality. And most importantly, the rate of deterioration is really accelerating. So the image on the right, which really actually is new. You didn't see this last year because this wasn't happening last year. There are vertical concrete panels at the plaza in front of the school. These are not small. They are, I'm estimating, maybe 2 feet tall, maybe 16, 18 inches wide. They're thick, they're concrete panels, and they are loose. The one you see on the right is close to falling out of the wall and landing right on a kid's toe. These are coming loose because the plaza itself on which they bear below is sinking, and you can see that in the picture as well. So, this is maybe a tough project for some people in Winchester to get their heads around, because if you just drive by the building, as many people do on Mystic Valley Parkway or Main Street or Washington Street, it looks great. If you pay a little more attention, like I know Mr. Brady does, you'll say, what's going on with the playground? And if you pay even more attention, you walk around the building, you say, oh my gosh, why is this falling apart? So the DPW cannot fix this. This is getting worse. In my opinion, it's becoming dangerous, and we got to do something about it. There's not an image of this in the presentation tonight, but Dr. Hackett did get to see himself now that he's moved into the building, that on the side that faces McCall and the Unitarian Church, the flat work there sank so much that a few years ago, DPW went in and they actually cut out some of it. They tried to re-pour it. They did, and of course, it sank again. And so now when it rains, the water actually ponds against the building. The concrete has sunk so much, it has actually stretched out the sealant joints. So there's voids in the sealant joints. The water actually comes into the building, into the aluminum and hollow metal frames of the windows. And that water is now getting into the walls. The wood trim is absorbing the water, and it's now popping off the wall. So it was good that the superintendent got to see that, for himself. So we just need to fix this. That's the bottom line. And we think 1.5 is a good number to do it.
Just to be clear, I didn't like seeing it, but I did see it. So
yeah. So that's all with respect to the top priority. Frank, do you want me to just say a word here about the chiller piece as well? Because I think there may be a mention of that on one of these. Okay,
it is.
So
yeah. It's on this slide as far as back.
It is. Okay, so the DPW, there are 2 chillers at Lincoln that support the air conditioning and the air handler there. One of the either a chiller or one of the condenser units actually has begun to fail. DPW's had some concern about it beginning a couple of years ago, and they wanted to kind of evaluate what the options were for replacement. We actually have 2 pieces of equipment that do the job together. So if one fails, we still have air conditioning, and we do. But DPW wanted to get a consultant on board to see what other options there were for air conditioning at Lincoln, including maybe a heat pump. Can we look at roof-mounted equipment? Should we look at ground-mounted equipment? Looking at things like length of refrigeration lines and so forth. So that was a request. I think we requested $60,000, and that was not in the fall. That was actually at an earlier town meeting. That's another example of a project that I think just as a consequence of workload at town hall, it got bid kind of late. But there is a report that's been prepared. There are a number of options that have been explored with a range of costs, a range of issues. I mean, whether it goes on the ground, does it go back on the roof? What kind of access do you need? I haven't even begun to look into things like operating costs that may be in the report, but I don't know that I've seen that yet. So it's basically a report that DPW was requesting, and now they have it. And on our part as a school committee, we asked town meeting if they would fund this evaluation, and they did. But there's no recommendation yet on what to do about it. And Pete Lawson underscored for us as recently as last week, even with this sort of partial equipment failure, we have no, it does not affect us moving air in the building, does not affect ventilation, fresh air, does not affect heat. It just means I think the equipment is working a little harder to cool the air. So, because the report I think literally came in last week, and kind of not unlike the roof report I just mentioned, it presents different scenarios, different options. It's just not ready for prime time. And I might ask if either Frank or Andrew actually would say something more about this, because I think you've talked to Pete about it. My understanding is DPW is going to be kind of digesting this report, maybe meeting with engineering and planning, maybe even Ken Pruitt, and just asking more questions and maybe kind of take a few months to come up with a recommendation. That's my sense of what's happening, but one of you might confirm that.
No, I think that's a fair representation. Andrew has been actually met with Pete again today. So Andrew, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, we've met on site a few times to review some of the proposals. I think we still have a lot of good questions to review that come from that report, and that Mr. Nixon has brought up as well to review. So I think, yeah, still more to review in terms of what the final recommendation would be.
Mr. Brady?
This is probably a good time to say, and I tried to make this point with Frank in the memo that everybody got on Monday. Typically we're talking about more than 2 capital projects. It's a little weird that there's just 2. And it was important to us to just remind the committee, and we talked about this, that there are other things out there, including the issues going on at the high school, that we're concerned about. So the reason why we have 2 things teed up is because there's only really 2 things ready for prime time with capital. But other needs are still progressing. And, once there are recommendations, I'm sure that Dr. Hackett will let the committee know, and particularly for things that have a real urgency. Well, I expect we'll have an urgency like the structural issue at the high school. We may know something before fall town meeting, and the EFPBC may want to ask for some free cash to fix it. And I'm being literally as fully transparent as I can be, because we don't know what we're going to learn. We don't know what the fix will be. We don't know what the cost will be. So that's why it's just premature. But I'm glad that Dr. Hackett and Mr. Maring sort of pulled a slide deck together, because I think if you take it in its entirety, you do get an appreciation that there are other needs out there beyond the 2 things that are being recommended tonight, and it's good to kind of keep our eye on the ball. So do you want to move on to the next slide?
Mr. Brady has a
question. Yeah.
Thanks. I just wanted to check in on the playground surface at Lincoln and the slide. Is there any update on that?
So I think that's going to come up under, there is a slide on that, Seamus, under the central office capital priorities, I think. But maybe we can defer to Andrew if he wants to say something about that now, or do we talk about it when we get there in the presentation?
Yeah, we have some notes on I believe it's the last slide for some district-wide efforts on that.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, and if you want to read ahead, Seamus, there's a couple of 2 or 3 paragraphs on that. I think it's on page 7 of the memo about kind of a short-term plan and a long-term plan for Lincoln. So yeah, if it's okay, if you want to go to the next slide, and I don't know what it's going to be.
Lynch, got that one.
Oh, that's an easy slide. Dr. Hackett, tell everybody what our priorities are for Lynch.
Well, we kind of focused on the entire building. So, as you know, we are in the really deep detailed planning phases. The EFPBC met earlier this week, had a great meeting, in-person meeting actually at Town Hall. And we got a chance to see some of the materials being used, interior, exterior, as samples. and no final decisions have been made, but it was a really good opportunity to start seeing something so tangible and really think about this building. We're getting closer. So I personally thought that their selections of colors was excellent. It's kind of timeless, classic, timeless. It's you're not going to go in the building and think you've walked back into the 70s. But I think it also will just give us a good palette for adding our own things to it, whether it's wall graphics and things that we can change along the way. So we're moving.
And the only other thing I would add that I think a couple of committee members would actually really appreciate, especially given some of the things we've already covered tonight, we're going to be having an EFPBC meeting soon, physically at Ambrose, and VO. It's going to be a moving meeting, pun intended. We are going to be meeting with Pete Lawson and his staff, and the purpose of that meeting is to show both the EFPBC and the design team the details at Ambrose that have worked really well, just in terms of longevity and maintenance, cleaning and maintenance, that they might want to see repeated. The inverse is true, things that have been a pain in the butt to maintain, or they want to be sure the design team sees it. And then we're going to go to VO and do the same thing. And it's a neat opportunity because TAP-A designed both buildings. Arguably VO is a little more relevant in terms of some of the interior detailing and design, but I think they will both be useful. I know Pete has a few things in particular he really felt strongly he wanted to bring to the team's attention. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I appreciate DPW is going to be taking some time to do that with us. It's going to be another evening meeting, so it's not going to be during his quote unquote work day. So that'll be happening this summer as well. Then on Morocco, still behind the wheel, so I can't read all the words, but as you guys know, we did pass a debt exclusion override to support what we called the Morocco Life Extension Plan. In 2020, we went to town meeting seeking funding to identify those building envelope and building systems, mechanical, electrical, plumbing priorities to extend the life of that building another 8 to 10 years, just like we said earlier on the roof. So that was supported along with the last flood mitigation project, which unfortunately we just learned at Capitol last week. Looks like it's coming in a little over budget. So there may be a supplemental funding request at town meeting this fall, but still making progress there in terms of permitting for the Morocco culvert. So at Morocco, we approved, I think it was $3.6 or $3.6 million. That was to, some of you will remember, painfully will remember, we actually had to replace the high efficiency modular gas fired boilers. They really weren't that old to begin with, but had been just very, very difficult to run and were frankly just not reliable. So that was phase one. We did that. Last year, we did the roof repair and replacement work I previously described. This summer, the building is de-energized and we are replacing some of the primary electrical service in the building. Also putting in, I believe, some additional Cat 5 or Cat 6 cable. I think there may be a little bit of Wi-Fi work that's going on in there as well. But importantly, that work also includes, we're updating the site lighting to more efficient LEDs, but also with better coverage. And we're even adding some LED fixtures as well. And we did reach out to the abutters for some input on, what lights at night really should be on all night versus what lights maybe should not be on and should come on with like a motion sensor. So we got some really good input from members of the public, and yeah, that was basically just really helpful. So anyway, the electrical work is going. Now, in addition, I will also just say we had separately sought funding from town meeting prior to that override so that we could go in and start ripping out the original hand washing sinks. They're like stainless steel cabinets integral to these kind of credenza, or yeah, kind of like credenzas in the classroom, and papers and supplies used to be stored in there. Those are old. They're from 1966. They have many of them had rusted out, rotted, and DPW just found it nearly impossible to keep these fixtures maintained. So we got some money and we started with our youngest classrooms. We ripped those out in kindergarten and in first grade and in a number of second grade rooms and replaced them with new ADA accessible undermounted vanities. And what was kind of cool is in the first grade classrooms where they only had one hand washing sink, because those kids sing the alphabet song as they wash their hands. The first grade teacher said it took so long to wash their hands, they had to end their math lesson early, and nobody wants that. So we actually put in double vanities in the first grade classrooms so that the kids could get through hand washing a little faster. So I think that was a good move. So in terms of what's next for Morocco, we need to make a little more progress on the electrical work and then kind of reassess the funds that remain, because there is, as part of phase 3 or phase 4 of that work, there are some piping and plumbing improvements that we also wanted to make. But we need to just confirm what monies are left over in the project. And we may well be in a position to take some of those monies left over and get some hand washing sinks into areas where we just don't have them. So I think it's a good story to tell. We're making good progress at Morocco. There was also some masonry repair as well at the clear story level when we were doing the roofing work last year. So, you know, a lot of good progress. But again, because there is this notion of the life extension plan, and we will either have a new Morocco or be underway with a new Morocco sometime between 2028 to 2030. There are no FY25 capital project recommendations. And then at VO, kind of same thing. It's still a very new building, built from 2011 to 2013. Then we did the addition. We fitted up the shelf space down below in 2015. The only issue I think relevant to VO that we have talked about at one point or another is the condition of the resilient surface at the playgrounds. And I do think Mr. Marin has a slide for that later on in the presentation, and that was mentioned in the memo. So, but nothing, as far as the building itself goes, it requires any kind of capital priority for this cycle. And then at Parkhurst, so again, I'm going to throw it to Dr. Hackett, who can tell you why we have no FY20 capital request for Parkhurst, because we're kind of busy up there.
I'll start us off, and I'll start us off by saying, publicly, it has been a very busy summer, and Andrew has done, has done a great job keeping tabs on this project. He's over there all the time. He's constantly talking to the crews that are over there. The Triumph who is the modular contractor, has been unbelievable to work with. They're exceptional. And they have been so accommodating for every little thing, from actually offering valet parking to some of our preschool teachers the last week of school, because as you remember, we were going through some abatement at the same time, to just even last night, yesterday afternoon, Chrissy held both a staff and a parent session walkthrough at Parkhurst, and people were really pleased with what they saw. It's been a ton of work, and on top of all that, Andrew has also been coordinating multiple moves of all kinds of furniture, and trying to find storage spaces where storage spaces don't exist. So, I have just really grateful and I really appreciate the amount of effort that Andrew has been putting in. I know it's the job. At the same time, he's I feel, he's the right person for it, and he's doing a phenomenal job with it. I also want to just kind of give Chrissy Capodanno, a shout out as well, because Chrissy's been, the amount of time that I've spent with her and the amount of time that I know she has spent outside of our meetings, not coming over and looking at spaces, going back and forth, trying to figure out who's going to go where, talking and keeping her staff up to date, making the move as smooth as possible. It's above and beyond what normally a principal would do. This is what she needs to do right now because she's the principal of that school. And but you just kind of never know. There was really, I always knew, and we knew she was extremely organized and a good communicator. It's serving her and us very well right now. So with that, I won't read through all this, but I will tell you that, we are, I believe, Chris and Andrew, I believe we're over $700,000 within the project on some of these improvements. Andrew, I don't know if you want to speak to anything here specifically.
Yeah, it looked really nice. I was just there this morning. In all those rooms, you'll see in some photos on the next slide. They did some, so these photos are the lower pictures there are the interior of Parkhurst. You can see each room has this accent wall that was painted, and then we ran this kind of wire molding there for projectors that will be installed in August, and then there are new whiteboards and cork boards on each side. And in this, I think it was this room in particular, this was previously a room with rugs on it, so we abated those and put down this new kind of linoleum tile floors there as well. And you can see kind of to the right of, or in the center there's, we redid the stairwells with some different surfacing. And then the top level photos are from the modulars. So the top left one is kind of all the bank of modulars installed together. And then the two on the right are kind of the interiors of the classroom and then the hallway that they're working on the electrical and finalizing the flooring over these next 2 weeks.
Ms. Molnese.
Oh, I don't have a question, but I was just going to say I was walking up there the other day, and I guess as we've been talking about this project all along, and talking about 14 modular classrooms, I really was thinking about 14 individual buildings. And so when I saw it, I was really shocked to see that it was just one big building with the 14 classrooms, I guess seven aside. So it was it took up much less room than I expected. I thought there was going to be a smattering of buildings scattered across, lined up.
And I'll say that while I miss the Zen garden and stuff, I appreciate the Lynch colors and frankly these rooms look pretty nice compared to the old Lynch. So I think it's actually a little upgrade here. Looking forward to being in there for the next 2 years.
And they were definitely working away inside on the wiring and everything.
Ms. Bergstrom.
Dr. Hackett, when do you expect staff to be able to start moving things in there? And do we have any timeline on that? And
love timeline questions.
Are the kids and parents going to be able to get in and sort of see it since it's a new space before the first day of school?
So I would say because of how well Triumph has done and how they're doing and how this project's moving along, I believe, Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but we believe right now that we'll be ready to open, take over the site on Monday, August 14th. Is that right, Andrew?
Yep. Yeah, that should be. Yep, that's correct. Yep.
So that provides, especially with a late start this year, that provides quite a bit of room and time for people to come by and see it. Chrissy will be moving, obviously, the administrative offices over there, so it'll feel like a school. Andrew has been working with a contractor on some signage. He wouldn't let me do the Lynch School Parkhurst campus, but it is the Lynch School at Parkhurst. So there'll be signage going in both outside and inside the building as well.
And does that include the landscaping work and all that, or will some of that have to continue on to the beginning of the school year, playground areas, things like that?
I believe that is turnkey on August 14th. I think they're
awesome.
Done. I would say just that picture of the hallway, the modular to the right, I was just to Ms. Bonasi's point, I'm standing in that picture. I'm standing right at the very end, one end of the modular unit, and it just looks like, it looks almost bigger than the existing building. It took me by surprise just how big it is, and they are going to be great spaces.
Yeah, the spaces look beautiful.
Before I go to Mr. Brady, if you're done, Ms. Bergstrom, I just had a question, Dr. Hackett. How do the students enter the long hallway? Are they entering from the side where the fuel tank used to be, or the other side, or is there an entry anywhere in the middle, or and for that matter, I guess the rest of the school, I guess the main entrance is probably on the end, but I was just curious if you could let us.
Sure, Andy, you want to take the modular entry question?
Yeah, sure. So kind of on each end of the modular is a entryway and exitway, and there'll be ramps being installed, I think by next week on each side. And so if you're entering from the parking lot side up top, so like that top left picture, there'll be an asphalt kind of walkway that takes you down if you're kind of heading towards the right hand side of this photo. It'll be an entrance on that side with the ramp. And then on the side closest to the existing modulars, there'll be a ramp there as well that you can kind of go into the, the previous ramp door as you go into the school committee room there. So that ramp will be replaced. You can get in on that side too. So that there's no access in the middle of the modulars. That's where the bathrooms are. So it's just on the ends.
And just to answer your other question, Mr. Stopcroft, we're still kind of working on and trying to figure out flow, like, lunch times and who goes through what doors. But in terms of the main building, it would be the front entry, obviously, and then also the entry at the existing modular where the school committee room would be. That will be a new ramp as well. They have taken that out. We're putting a new ramp in.
Well, Lynchies are definitely familiar with using all the available doors, so so thank you, Mr. Brady. Sorry to jump in there. I just wanted to, well, while we were on that
Oh, no worries. This is kind of more in looking at our, elementary schools in totality as we were reading through. I was kind of going over some research I had done, and it's interesting. In 1980 was when Lynch was converted. And then for about 20 years, nothing was really done of significance in Winchester Public Schools. So there was kind of a 20-year break for the proverbial taxpayer. And then in 2000, McCall was kind of converted from a junior high to a middle school. 2 years later, we renovated Lincoln. 3 years later, we built Ambrose. So just to give the committee the sense that we can do things pretty quickly. And Winchester was a different town in 0205. It was, in fact, less wealthy than it is now. So I just want to put that point across, because we did Ambrose in 05, but then it took 8 years until we had VO done in 2013. And then we did the high school in 2017, but then it took us, 6 years now to get going on Lynch. So my concern is I just want us to remember that we can work on the timeline that we did in the 2000s. We're quite capable of doing that. And I just hope that we honor that, because I think that's important to the whole community, and especially to the Morocco community, that we continue on as aggressive in a timeline as possible, and obviously reasonable as well.
So
I would just, if I can I just add two things to that timeline. There were two important additions to McCall. There was the library addition, and then very shortly, not that long after, we did the E-Wing edition in 2009. And the library edition, although it's beautiful, drew some scorn in the community, because when it was originally designed, there were questions about whether or not we should put in the capacity for an extra floor above the library, and everybody was assured that we would never need it. But as some of you have heard me say many times before, from 2003 to 2012, our enrollment went up by 32%. So the community was not happy that we were spending money on things and turning right around and asking for more. But yeah, point well taken. All up, what backed all of this work up has been a really thorough and thoughtful and clearly articulated master plan. We wouldn't have gotten any of that done without it.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Do we have more schools in here?
We do.
You want to say something about McCall?
No, you're doing a good job. Keep going.
All right. So again, I can't read. We're doing all the repair this summer. As I said earlier, there's sort of 3 steps to to get that work going. It's on the slide. It's not. Dr. Mack, who was extremely creative in his first year with us in identifying some ESSER funds that could be used towards mechanical control upgrades at McCall. I think you all remember that. That's another great example where, Mr. Lynn and to see this done. We had teachers and students complaining about, you know, the classroom environment, just air movement, mechanical point of view, and thermal comfort. But Pete Lawson kept coming to Capitol and saying, well, you know, this is what it's going to take to get it done. We never seemed to have enough money. Then Pete suggested, well, what if we did what if we did it over 3 years? And thanks to Dr. Hackett, we were actually able to do it over 2 years. So ESSER, in fact, I think we only used like 25 grand of capital, and we used much more of ESSER funds. So anyway, that was great. It's a good example of the, you know, the partnership with DPW and with the town when those monies are available. So the only real issue around McCall, again, circles back to that conceptual roof report. And I'll go back to Ms. Bolognesi's question. I think it was Karen who asked, you know, what about priority? So yes, we were hoping that from the report, we might get at least some inclination of relative priority one school over the other. Although it's not explicitly stated that McCall is, you know, more important than Ambrose in terms of, you know, getting the roof done. It's not expressly stated. I think it's pretty clear in the report, particularly when they say that, you know, there's no real need to replace anything at Ambrose right now, except for those 2 small pieces. That's not the case at McCall. What is interesting is McCall is a collection of roofs of different buildings from different ages and different materials. The roofs at McCall, subject to this, you know, evaluation, because there were certain things that were excluded, right? Like the E-wing and the recent 3-story addition, and there are some roofs that are fairly new and they're in good shape. But the areas that were evaluated by Gale, they fall into one of 2 categories. It's either pitched shingled roof, not unlike maybe your house, or it's flat membrane roof. They are very, very clear that the vast majority of current roof leaks that we have are in areas underneath pitched shingled roofs. And therefore, they go further to recommend that if we were going to do the work at McCall in phases or in separate projects, they would strongly recommend we attack the pitched shingled roofs first. But interestingly, they make another point. This is really a constructability observation, that if we were going to re-roof everything at McCall as one project, you would absolutely want to start with the pitched shingled roofs, because getting up there, just stripping the roof, getting the material up there, the scaffolding, the pathway to get the materials up there, we would have to subject, it's inescapable, we would be subjecting the horizontal membrane roofs that are adjacent to a lot of abuse. And their concern is you may wind up doing more damage to those membrane roofs. So you should kind of work from the top down. And it's those pitch shingled roofs that are actually in the worst shape. Another very interesting observation they've made is that if you stand at the back of McCall near the field, if you stand like between, let's say, the library and that recent E-wing addition, if you look up at the back of the building, you will find coming out of the one of those pitch shingled roofs a quite large masonry chimney, a brick chimney. It's quite tall. I can't tell you how tall it is. It's very tall. It has like steel collars on it to hold it together, and it is laterally braced with steel. The steel goes right through the roof to the structure underneath. I think that chimney was tied. I think that goes down to the old incinerator room. I'm not 100% sure. I don't believe it's in use. And the engineer, clearly from their observations, it seems to them it's not in use. It doesn't look like it's in use. So they've made the suggestion that with any re-roofing of the pitched shingled roofs, we may want to seriously consider taking down that chimney to below the roof line and capping it, and then you roof, right? And that's actually that's a very helpful suggestion, because if so long as it stands there, it's masonry and it's subjected to the weather and movement, joints will fail. I would not want to be the mason working on it, because it's really high up there and it's very tall and it's on a very, very steep roof. So their suggestion is, hey, you may want to actually demolish this chimney. I think that's a great idea. I don't believe, and Mr. Marin can correct me if I'm not, I don't believe the cost of demolition of chimneys and other things that penetrate the roof is even in the estimate that they've provided, because what they've done, they're just providing an estimate, you know, for re-roofing. Certainly all they were asked to do. I can't tell you what the cost was, unless if Mr. Marin remembers or has access to it. I don't have those numbers in my head as clearly as I did on the Ambrose side, but they were sort of strongly suggesting the priority would be the pitch shingled roofs. Andrew, I thought it was like somewhere between I thought it was 1.2 million or something like that. I thought it was something on that order, but if you wanted to do everything at McCall, if you wanted to re-roof everything, it was over $7 million. But you got to go through the report to really appreciate that not all of those existing roofs, in their opinion, really warrant replacement right now. So again, it's a helpful report, but it doesn't sort of come out with a strong recommendation. Gives us some options, and it's good to have them. I think maybe Andrew or Frank, maybe you've had more conversation with Pete about this since the report came out. So I certainly welcome you to say anything else, sort of the extent of what I would think about it.
And do you want to take that? I know you talked to Pete today.
Yeah, I was looking for the numbers on my end. I didn't find it yet. I think it's still early. I haven't had the whole conversation yet with Pete in terms of some of his thoughts and recommendations. So I am meeting with him again tomorrow and into next week on it.
Ms. Bergstrom, questions?
Yeah, thank you. I know this is a new report, but we've referenced it a couple times now, and I realize it falls under capital, but it's also school roofs. So I'm just wondering, after Andrew and central office have a bit of time to digest it, if there's a way for us to also be able to review it.
Well, can I just say, sitting on Capital representing the school committee, you know, Capital is just sort of, we rank things and we solicit money. This was a school committee priority. So I think it absolutely should come to the school committee, you know, when it's complete. So the engineer was really, I mean, we twisted many arms to try to get this, even in draft form. We wanted to get something. And I appreciate that Town Hall worked this hard, because even though the report is not complete and has a lot of holes, it's helpful for me anyway to know that, for instance, at Ambrose, you know, there's a recommendation they think could be as much as $750,000, but if you wanted to do everything, it's 3.2. I like knowing that now tonight. I'd like to know that now tonight in a not yet complete report. Because that number could have been higher, right? It could have been, well, 2 million on the low end and 5 million on the high end. So it's sort of like a gut check. It gives us some frame of reference, but there's definitely more work to be done. And I know, as Andrew was just saying, Pete still has to go through it. And I think the engineer themselves have some questions. So I agree with you. I think we should get a copy when it's like actually fit for print.
Right. And you know, not to go back to the same issue, but I mean, we expected schematic design, Mr. Nixon, so which would have given us an actual number to go to town meeting with. I appreciate the estimates, so we know where we're in the ballpark, but you know, we also know that we have also done projects in the past where we have gotten one thing that has given us an estimate, and then the schematic design comes in a third to 50% more. So I just want to make sure that the numbers we're getting are solid and based on actual work to be done, and not just an estimate too.
Yeah, I do agree. I do agree with you. If I try to be half full about what we got, I would say that I think this report is helpful enough in that there may be areas at McCall that, let's say, DPW was concerned about. Maybe they have limited access to it, or just because of the age or whatever it is. They may be reassured that there are some areas up there that really don't need to be replaced or repaired in the next year. So certainly I think this report will help better bring into focus what is recommended, but there definitely needs to be some conversation between, Dr. Hackett, Mr. Marin, Mr. Lawson, and engineering and planning, and the town manager around, sort of just priorities, because we're not the ones that maintain those roofs. DPW does. So
Right.
Yeah.
I'll just add in there. I appreciate allowing them to finish the report. At the same time, I appreciate the value that the directional insights that you mentioned that you're able to get would also be useful once it's available. So as soon as possible, that would be wonderful. Ms. Bolognese.
I was just wondering, with the pitched and shingled roof at McCall, do you know roughly like what portion of the whole roof that is? I mean, I can see in this picture, like the front.
I mean, I don't. I would say it actually depends upon how you define portion. Because if you're a bird and you're looking down at the building, it's a certain square footage. But because it's a pitched roof, if you measure the pitched roof, along the face of the roof, it's obviously much more, right? Because there's more square footage of roof when it's pitched than if it's flat.
Mhm.
So
I'm just
so I'm
wondering,
not.
is this
I'm
like
not-
roughly 3/4 of the building? 90% of the building? A quarter of the building? Just,
I would say it's well, as maybe as a share of the actual roof that the engineer was looking at, because remember there were portions of the building they were excluding because it's newer
Yep.
roof. I would say the pitched portion is maybe somewhere between a quarter and a third. What do you think, Andrew? Is that fair? It's certainly not less than, I would say somewhere between maybe a third and a quarter, maybe 20 to 35%, something like that.
I'd say that's safe guesstimate. I think so.
All right. Any other questions on McCall? If not, looks like we have Winchester High School up next.
Okay, so again, just an indication of how quickly things are moving. This is a great slide because we actually have a couple of updates on Winchester High School, even since you guys got the memo on the 17th. So I'm very pleased to share that this week, Monday night, the EFPBC met. Engineering and planning through Meg White. Meg actually has had a meeting involving Chris Conway, who's our facilities manager out there at the high school. She was actually able to wrangle some engineers from Simpson, Gumpertz, and Hager. They are a very, very well-respected forensic engineering firm. I've worked with them before. I have a very high opinion of them. They've also worked in Winchester before. They are very, very, very bright folks, and they're in high demand always. So Meg shared with the EFPBC that they're interested in the problems we have at the high school. They walked through kind of what the problems were. They've had a couple of Zoom meetings. They generated a proposal for Meg, and Monday night the EFPBC unanimously authorized a contract with SGH for both the structural floor issues that we talked about, that is, the rust jacking and the concrete that we saw on our little field trip in the guidance hallway, both to evaluate that, and the pinhole leaks that continue to pop up in the primer trap plumbing. And on that latter point, Chris Conway is actually going to be cutting out sections of pipe and sending it to them. They have a laboratory where they do metallurgical analysis and mineral analysis. So we are going to be sending them physical samples of piping that they can begin to evaluate. These are all, and frankly, pretty modest sums. I mean, just the piping evaluation is like, I think, $9,000. So it's not really the cost issue. It's more about getting talented people who have the capacity to do it and the availability to kind of get on their schedule. So yeah, just pleased to share we finally have somebody on board. These analyses have to happen. They'll come back with some findings and hopefully some recommendations, and only then can we begin to get our heads around what it's going to cost. The EFPBC did ask Meg if could we confirm that with regards to the kind of the structural issue that I know we're all certainly concerned about. were we going to be evaluating other areas of the building? In other words, not just the place where we see the floor failure, but is this happening somewhere else and we just haven't seen it yet? So the answer was yes. So they're going to be able to, whether they're going in on their bellies or with some equipment, they're gonna kind of scope out everything in that crawl space. So certainly happy about that. And then the other item at the high school was again, more failing floors, but that resilient floor in the gym, which is not is not from the renovation. That floor predates the renovation. It's just old. It's a floor on top of a floor. And as we've discussed, I think in May or June, as a committee, that our athletic director has interest in actually turning the room 90 degrees in terms of its orientation with equipment and ball courts and so forth. And so there again, the last time we talked to you about it, we thought we would get a proposal that would be at or above that $35,000 threshold, and that we'd be going to capital. But we were very pleased to find that TAPE, who we're working with on Lynch, so they're here a lot, they're engaged with us a lot. They took a look at the early work that had been done in 2018, and they were willing to take this on. And I believe, Dr. Hackett, that was like $8,500, right? Something like that.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So, that's not a capital project. Capital will not even consider it. It's way too small. But it's small enough that Dr. Hackett, Mr. Marin, made a decision to just use some available district funds to get that going. So I'm pleased about that. And so the good news there is that in a sense, now we're sort of ahead of schedule, right? Because when we talked about this last time, we thought we might have to go to capital to ask for money to study it. And who knows the outcome of that request? Well, we didn't have to do that. We short-circuited that because fee came in so low. And now that work has actually started. So the architects have actually been out there. They met with Marcaria, I think, last week. And there's no guarantee here, but we have internally, we're trying to get some report and some estimate of cost prior to this select board meeting on August 14th. Mr. Mucci wants to hold kind of a summit about capital needs broadly. And when Mr. Nardone and I were with the select board, I guess a month ago, making them aware of some of the high school issues, this was one of the things we talked about. Mr. Mucci seems very interested in the flooring replacement at the gym and the reconfiguration of the space. I think he has some personal familiarity with like how it works or doesn't, as the case may be today. So he asked if we could just get whatever information we had as soon as we could. So we said we would do it, and we will share it with the school committee as well.
Ms. Bergstrom.
Mr. Nixon, I'm wondering on the main corridor flooring and the concrete failures, are you aware if the town has contacted an insurance company, legal advice on this, since this is part of the remodel of the high school? I know often if you're going to need to make a claim, you need to notify early. So I'm just wondering if they have taken the opportunity to do that, if we're aware.
Right. So we've actually talked about this specific issue at the past couple of EFPBC meetings, and it was a request of Mr. Betancourt when we were with him and the board last month as well. Could we put some folks on notice? So Meg White is working with town council on figuring out how to do that. So one doesn't obviously just send off a letter. I think there needs to be some thoughtfulness to what does the letter say. But she has heard that loud and clear. So did Jay Nardone, by the way. So we're not opposed to that, but that's something engineering and planning is working on with management and town council. So I don't have a date for you, but that's either on the to-do list or that's already sort of starting.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Excellent. Any other comments or questions on the high school? Is that a Mystic School?
So this one's really easy. There were we haven't had any school committee priorities for Mystic really in some time. I think if you'll refer to the memo that you got a couple of days ago, or you may remember from last year, because I think we discussed it briefly. So Pete Lawson, on behalf of DPW, did request, I think it was $72,000 last year, to replace some sections of the original cast iron sectional boiler. I mean, these are old school boilers, very inefficient, but they work, meaning they make heat. But for anyone whose kids have been at the Mystic School with Kids Corner or Rec, and I'm not the only one at this committee who's fits that description. Heating control has really been an issue there at Mystic. So Pete, my understanding is that Pete is also going to be requesting this year for the FY25 capital cycle some money so that he could go out and put together a set of design documents to actually replace the heating system at Mystic. That's not for construction, but that's to, you know, take a look at the building today and come up with a proposal on what it would be to just replace the system altogether. And this is probably a good point to say as kind of a public service announcement that the schools are unique. We're the only sort of entity in town through the capital process that has kind of two different advocates. So the fire department has one advocate at Capitol, it's the fire chief. The police has one, it's the police chief, right? And you know, the Board of Health has, you know, Jen Murphy. But when it comes to schools, you have certainly the district, the administration, in consultation with the school committee, can identify projects. Most often we're identifying things that like directly affect like the teaching, the learning experience, maybe highly visible projects, certainly projects that are very expensive. It's always helpful when a school committee can get behind something that costs a lot of money. But the other advocate is DPW. It's Pete Lawson, because he's our school facilities manager. And Pete does make requests from time to time. These tend to be more along the line of what you might think of. I don't want to say maintenance, because maintenance is really part of an operating budget, but they're much more along the lines of sort of facility, building system upgrades, replacements, that kind of thing. And he's been doing it for years. His school committee doesn't really weigh in on those requests, because that really is more about kind of the nitty gritty of just keeping buildings running, keeping them efficient and maintained. But certainly I've tried over the past couple of years, and I know Dr. Hackett and Andrew Marin have been helpful as well. We've basically made a concerted effort to try to make the school committee aware, at least, of kind of what some of those things are that DPW is requesting, just so we kind of have that broader context.
Right. And then district-wide.
Okay, so district-wide, I think so. The carriage house is here just because it's, you know, it's not really a school building, and we did, you know, talk about that a little bit previously. So that the request, of course, to just finish up the drawings we have and get the roof replaced is really just about preserving the asset. I would also just add that the cost to replace the roof is, believe it or not, actually cheaper than the cost to take the building down, because we also had estimates for, you know, what that would look like. We had 2 years ago, the cost for hazardous material abatement alone, I think was like $94,000 or $95,000, and of course that would be greater today. So the goal about getting a roof on the building is just to put it in safekeeping, stop the deterioration, with the understanding that, you know, we would then revisit the carriage house like when we do the master plan, which is a good segue to what comes almost next on the slide. I'll look at the multi-year outlook thing, that second bullet. I believe this did, and I've actually heard from, you know, some of my peers who are MASC members that one of the things I think really distinguishes us as a district is we have been very, very sort of deliberate and thoughtful about producing a school facilities master plan every 10 years. And it serves us really well. We got our first round of funding for the current master plan, and I think it was 2015. But then there was a second tranche of money because we sort of expanded the scope of that. So, you know, not for FY25, but certainly for FY26. The recommendation is, you know, we would probably need to be going out to get funding for a master plan. The conversations that, that certainly I've had with Dr. Hackett only build on some conversations I think we've all had together around the table, is our interest in an updated demographic or enrollment study, particularly given, the 40B housing that's going on, River Street, Cambridge Street, right? We got a lot of housing projects a lot of housing units that are being built. We've also got stuff coming like Washington and Swanton. So that would be important to get that information. That information, sometimes we do that work within the overall master plan, but it doesn't have to be. It's okay if you do it sort of before the master plan, so long as the information is still relatively fresh. So that's kind of the thinking would be that we may get a enrollment demographic study going, that and when you break that out, it is not expected to be $35,000. So it would, there's no expectation it would be a capital priority, but the work that remains certainly could be. I think the importance of the updated enrollment demographic study, it's twofold. It begins to tell us what a new Morocco, not necessarily what it would look like, but what would it need to do, right? So I'm fond of saying, if design is problem solving, programming is problem seeking. So aside from the fact that Morocco was built in 1966 and it's an older building, what will a new Morocco need to do? In other words, how many kids need to be accommodated? How many kids do we think are going to be in the VO district, right? The Lincoln district, the Ambrose district, 5-10 years from now? That's useful information that you're going to begin to get. The other real value of that early study, again, not explicitly like a capital request, but I think it's an important initiative, is I think it'll be very informative to Dr. Hackett when we think about the potential for redistricting. So we last redistricted in November of 2012 was our vote, and that was effective fall of 13. That coincided with the opening of VO. Prior to that, and that was townwide redistricting. Prior to that, the last redistricting was actually when Ambrose opened up in like 2006. And in that redistricting, there was only one line that moved, and it was the line between Lincoln and Ambrose. So that did not impact as many people. So, we're building a lot of housing, got families presumably coming in. Many will have kids. We're building a new Lynch. Inevitably, a conversation about redistricting is going to come up. And so that enrollment study, I think, is going to be really important. I'm going to ask actually Dr. Hackett or Mr. Marin to say something about the digital records management to sort of close this out. What I will say quickly on the playgrounds is that Lincoln, Ambrose, and VO all have this kind of rubberized play surface at the playground. Ambrose surface has been patched many times. It frankly looks terrible, but I mean it's sort of in one piece. So long as, well, it doesn't look good. It's multiple patches, needs to be replaced. My understanding is the Ambrose PTO has also raised some money to even like either add equipment or replace equipment. And then at VO, which is our most recent one, unfortunately, there's been quite a bit of deterioration there as well. And as Mr. Brady has reminded the committee, at the Lincoln School, there's deterioration, but even some of the equipment is no longer sort of structurally attached to the concrete below. So our thinking was that in the short term, we need to cut into the rubberized surface at Lincoln, get the play equipment, attached again so the equipment is usable, and do just a short-term patch on that rubberized surface, and then put together basically a proposal, get an estimate to just replace all three playground surfaces for FY26, because it's the same material. It would basically be one project. Even if you want to kind of change the color from school to school, you could do that, but it would be, the same contractor. The reason that we say those three schools and not others is, we're building a new Lynch. That new school will have a rubberized surface. And at Morocco, it's a mulched playground, but remember, we're trying to sort of extend the life of that building until we get a new one. So the thinking is no need to rip all that up that's there for a rubberized play surface if we're focused on building a new Morocco. It's not an inexpensive material.
Mr. Hopcroft, if I could just follow up to what Mr. Nixon just said, and also want to just hand it to Andrew as well. Andrew and I, with Pete Lawson, have been having the playground conversation all year long. I mean, clearly, there's work to be done. I think Mr. Brady spoke to some of the years where the town wasn't able to do a lot. I think the playgrounds have been a little bit into no person's land. DPW view them as theirs, that they own them as in terms of, as part of our facility. But there hasn't been adequate funding to do what we need to do. And we've been also meeting with not only we've met with the Ambrose Parent Association representatives this morning, as early as this morning, yesterday, sorry. And we've also did meet with PISC and earlier this year to talk about how we're looking to really try to coordinate our efforts with facilities, because it doesn't really matter who owns it if we can't use them. We have to do something. So Andrew, I want you to speak, if you would, specifically to Lincoln's slide, because Mr. Brady did ask that question earlier. It doesn't really explicitly say it on here.
Sure. Yeah. I'll have just two updates. One on the Lincoln slide is in working with Pete Lawson. It's our expectation that we'll have that replaced in August before the start of school. And then second on just kind of the playground projects in general, again, working with Mr. Lawson on it, meeting again tomorrow for possibility of looking, does this remain in the capital process or maybe outside of that as a separate kind of ARPA request with the select board too. So probably more updates next week in terms of some of his thinking as well.
Great. Mr. Brady.
Thanks so much. I appreciate those updates. I'm, particularly excited about the playgrounds. I'm hopeful that as we look to those future projects, we really can, as Dr. Hackett spoke to, really collaborate with the PTOs. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. From my personal experience, I've seen time and time again, PTOs get excited about playgrounds. And if we kind of help them see that as a goal, I think that they'd be happy to partner with us. And I think we could do some really significant work. And I think, people talk about social emotional, and I think play is a big part of that. And play is actually really, as we all know, important to students learning. And so, people might think that a playground at a school is kind of a luxury, but it's actually really important. And so the more significant opportunities you can build into those playgrounds for students of all abilities, which is also really important, I think, to us as a committee. I just really like to see that. And I think we're at a place where we can do that, just knowing a lot of the folks in town are interested in it. I know the select board is interested in it as well. So I just hope we can kind of seize that opportunity. And just another piece I'd like to kind of add to our outlook in future projects. We still do need to figure out what's the best solution for our central office staff. I appreciate their efforts and being scattered across the district. And I think they're doing a phenomenal job, but that does have an impact both on their ability to do their job and the schools they're in. Space is very important in schools when you work in them day to day. When you're trying to do things like MCAS, when you're trying to do things like small group instruction, tutoring, you need those spaces. And so every time there's someone who's taken one as an office, which is what they need to do, you're taking away from that. And kids are in the hallway and it's not great. So I think we just need to really keep our eye on that. And I say that, just going back to when the town bought what is now, the Ambrose property. So I think we need to have our eye out for opportunities. There will be buildings. There's for sale signs everywhere in Winchester. And some of them might be spaces that would work for a central office. The town was not interested in spending the money on the carriage house. I understood that. I thought about that and voted one way initially, and then I changed my mind as I thought more about it. But I think we do need to come together and agree on, what are we going to spend to create a central office? And I think we can be creative, but I just think we need to keep that on top of mind and not kick it down the road, proverbially, because it's definitely that's been happening for quite some time now. And so I think we are a very creative and capable committee, and so I hope we can focus on that going forward as well.
So can I just jump in quick and say I'm glad, Seamus, that you brought that up, and I agree with you that need is 100% there. That is a perfect example of that would be one of the charges of the next master plan update. We need space for administrators, just like we need space for teachers and for students and specialists. So totally agree with you, and I think that there's no question that would be one of the central charges of the master plan. Master plan might, I would presume, also kind of look back at Parkhurst. As you all remember from last year, but a couple of different revenue models that were generated. Parkhurst is a very valuable building to the right candidate, and I believe others have even reached out to Superintendent Hackett even recently with interest in it. But it's occupied, so we can't give it up just yet. So understanding right now, the master plan says Parkhurst should be used either for swing space or for rental. And that right now is the official plan. It may still be when we do an update, but who knows? So we need to look at that, right? I mean, some folks at FinCom had even suggested, well, what if you renovated part of Parkhurst and you put central office back in there? That's an option, but that costs a lot of money, and then you wind up with less space remaining. So all like good stuff that I expect would be evaluated in the master plan, where we come up with some options.
Thank you, Mr. Brady and Mr. Nixon. Ms. Bergstrom. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Nixon. This has been a good overview of the capital priorities. I do have to admit that I am missing the spreadsheet that we usually accompanies this from you, that tracks past projects and future projects. I'm having a little bit of challenge putting the carriage house roof replacement in a place without that, without understanding what the future of that building would be, and why this would be a priority in particular this year, when we're looking at roofs on Ambrose and McCall that actually are occupied buildings that are going to need, from the initial assessment, it sounds like some work done on them. So I have to put a plug in for the spreadsheet you've given us in the past, and just say that I do miss that. I do agree with Mr. Brady about the playgrounds. I'm also interested in playground equity. I think that when we bring PTAs into the process, some schools may end up with some gorgeous facilities, and other schools may not, based on their ability to fundraise. So as we look forward, maybe the playgrounds would actually be a great thing to include as part of our master plan moving forward, to ensure not just equal access for kids, which is important, but equity in terms of the spaces that are available for kids to play in from school to school. I also appreciate Mr. Brady thinking about the central office, and totally agree with you, Mr. Nixon, that is excellent content for our FY26 master plan. And moving forward to that, I think I'd love to hear after this year and next year what Dr. Hackett and his staff are thinking about the amount of space that they need and the kind of space that they need. And not only are our students using different spaces to learn in, but our administrators may be using different spaces to work in. So instead of just thinking in a traditional office building style environment, I'd be curious, after a couple of years of spending some time in different spaces and people being in different places, if we have the same needs that we envisioned even for central office when we first started thinking about the carriage house as that space.
Thank you, Ms. Bergstrom. Dr. Hackett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to I appreciate the comments about central office, and it absolutely does have an impact. We are occupying spaces that are available, and we've worked really hard to make sure we're not taking over student spaces. But to Mr. Brady's point, there's never enough space for kids and instruction, and we are very grateful to both Lincoln and the high school for hosting us. But we're not just scattered among buildings, we are scattered within the buildings that we're in. So as an example, Dr. Alanema and Ms. Kirby are on the back side of the auditorium at Lakin, where our office is on the ground level. At the high school, we have used where Andrew's and Peter's office had been, and then the business office is in the back of the high school. We also appreciate to the high school, but we will not be able to even maybe midterm stay there. I don't believe, because we are seeing, I think we're going to continue to see some population growth. And I'm glad Mr. Nixon mentioned getting into and looking into moving forward on an enrollment demographic study. We've talked about that. Not only is that helpful for the planning in these next conversations from Morocco to all the other facilities, but it's also I think we would benefit from that for our FY25 budget and future budget cycles, so we can have a better idea and a better handle on what we're potentially looking at. In terms of the carriage house, I have to admit, I was pretty excited about the carriage house when I first got here. I thought, the design was good. I've never been fortunate enough to actually have people build a central office everywhere I've been. I've been, kind of stuffed in different places, not dissimilar, but generally central office, all one location. I understood certainly the challenges of that conversation. There's a ton of, as we all know, not just school department capital needs, but there's a ton of town capital needs as well. What I will say is I've continued to think about this, and I do think that we have to make a decision on the roof replacement. And, what we haven't said in this meeting, and I'm just going to put it out there, is that, if the town definitely weighed in on the carriage house at a $6 million price tag, which I completely understand. There could be funding opportunities in the future. We've talked about the rental of parkers potentially. There could be some public-private partnerships. There could be some other revenue sources that take the central office off of the plate in competing with everything else, which I think is going to be a problem no matter where we go. I think if we're competing against schoolhouses for roofs, and I don't even feel good about that. So I do think this is an important decision. One of the things that we had kind of talked about kind of just informally is, and I know it's been discussed before, do we surplus the carriage house to the town and essentially give it over to the town? As I've thought more about that, what we really don't want to do, because it's not just the carriage house that goes with it, and I really don't know the plot of land that encompasses that property that we control, but we cannot give up the property. So absent trying to, and Pete Lawson has been really clear that he's really concerned about replacing that roof, because he's concerned about liability issues. He's concerned from roof collapse to continued deterioration of the building. I think it really is going to be a question of, if we were to not do the roof replacement, then what do we do? If the answer to that question is to tear the building down, the school committee would need to seek funding to do that, and the cost associated with tearing that down, because there will be abatement like everything else, I'm quite certain will exceed the 205 that's on the table here. So I just wanted to add that those points. This is not, it's not an easy conversation because it is $205,000 on a building that doesn't have kids in it. But at some point, there's going to be money that's going to have to be spent. And if this buys us some time to see whether or not there's some other options down the road, whether or not we are able to pursue some private, public, or other funding sources. It seems to me that this makes sense to do, although I understand the argument against. Thank you.
All right, so the superintendent and our capital representative, Mr. Nixon, have recommended the work at Lincoln, the flat work for 1.5 million, and the carriage house roof for 205. Wondering, it'd be great to I think we need to figure out what kind of consensus there is from the group, and so if other voices want to weigh in on either of those items.
Can I just add one other just footnote to that if I can, Tom? So it specifically, we're recommending them in that order. What we're saying is the Lincoln project is the top priority, carriage house roof below that. And, if there were 5 or 6 projects we were ranking, I can imagine carriage house would not be in the second position. But the capital planning committee is well aware. We talked about it actually last night. We had a meeting. Capital is well aware of things that are going on at the high school, that are not right now, main stage discussion for capital, but, may have costs that are coming. So that the recommendation is those two projects, but literally in that order. First priority, Lincoln flat work.
And Mr. Nixon, Dr. Hackett, and Mr. Marin, are we certain that we are not going to get enough information on the Ambrose and McCall roofs in this cycle, in the capital cycle, to be looking at funding requests for those as well?
Well, based on the fact that we just got the initial reports today, and Pete Lawson couldn't say draft to us enough times, the town has to do its due diligence to go through the reports, make corrections, ask for changes if they're needed and appropriate. I think, we've had the experience, sorry to bring this up, but the solar study went through multiple iterations, obviously a little bit more complicated than roof projects, but I can't imagine a world in which we would have enough information to put those on for this capital funding cycle.
Even if they came in late to the capital funding cycle? I only asked because they were 2 of the priorities the select board gave to capital when they were offering capital money.
If they have that conversation, then that may change the priorities, but
okay.
We have
just being clear before we move forward too. So.
Well, yeah, and I think the timeline, the select board is looking to have a full scale capital townwide, school-wide capital conversation in August. I think that, which makes sense to me. They've have given kind of the directive or asked the capital planning committee to have the information from both school and town prior to that meeting, and capital does meet next week to consider priorities, or next week or the week after. I'm lost in weeks. Next week.
Yeah, we meet on Wednesday.
Yeah, so things could change, but this is where we are right now, and I do think it's important to meet these timelines, only because I don't want them having a conversation without us being represented at the table with our own priorities.
And can I offer my spin on that? I agree with everything actually Frank just said. But to circle back to that kind of January, February exercise that Ms. Bergstrom just mentioned, the request that came from the chair of the select board was, if we came up with a bunch of free cash,
right,
what might you do? So it really was like kind of coming up with spaghetti to throw at the wall. And I think you remember, because you and I talked a lot through that. You were chair of the school committee at the time. Yep. So we had 3 or 4 rapid fire capital planning committee meetings. It was very challenging because it happened to fall at a time where I think we only had 1 school committee meeting. It was that was tough. So it was very much a hypothetical, right? And so what we said to the select board was, well, and in particular, there was a request, I remember, how much do you think it would cost to replace the roof at Ambrose? How much would it cost to replace the roof at McCall? What we said was, at Ambrose, at least $3 million. So now suddenly we look like we know what we're talking about, but that's probably just luck. And then we said at McCall, much more. What's interesting is this report that just came out yesterday is telling us you don't need to replace the roof at Ambrose right now. Again, except there's two very, very small. I mean, like the areas that they're suggesting be replaced are like the size of my dining room, I think, maybe smaller. So essentially, they're saying you don't need to replace this roof right now. So that's interesting and useful for me to know. It's useful for me to know that if we just wanted to do it anyway, it would be $3.2 million. I believe, and the report suggests that, when you think about the present versus future value of money, I don't think it would be in our interest to replace the Ambrose roof today because we just did an evaluation. By the way, that includes destructive testing. So they did actually cut into the roof in Ambrose. They went digging down in it. They cut into the insulation, cut into the roof, specifically looking at substrates, and then they do go back and repair it afterwards. Here's how I find the report valuable, and I'm trying my best to answer your question. I see nothing from this report that drives any FY25 capital request. I really don't. What I think is useful in the report is because the roof is 18 years old, and we like to get at least 20 and usually 25 years out of our roofs. What have we learned from this report? If this school committee is serious about solar, as I am, and there's an opportunity to put solar at Ambrose, I think we should go back to the engineer and say, okay, if can this roof last another 3 or 4 years as is, absent a few patches or what have you? And if the answer is yes, if the answer is sure, if you want to replace this roof in FY28, yeah, you can do that. And you can maintain it with DPW's maintenance budget. I think that's tremendous because hopefully this fall we will have the structural analysis of the roof. We'll have a conceptual solar, report, and we can understand what value there is in putting solar on the roof. And then the other piece of that, which I think we've talked about only briefly before, I think I think I saw mention of it in the memo on Monday. Mr. Pruitt has been closely following a state grant program that is in, I think, the Senate and House bills. I honestly don't know what the status of it is right now, but there's real sort of enthusiasm and sort of movement towards a grant program at the state level that will basically substantially reduce the cost of replacing roofs when you make the commitment that with yes. So like this is why I was saying earlier, the report is helpful because like it gives us context. It's not a recommendation. It's also helpful because, if you will, the house isn't burning down, right? It's like the roof is in much better shape than frankly I was expecting to hear, given some of the comments that I've been hearing, in the ether. And that's good too, right? I mean, I'd much rather be told, gee, you don't need to replace this roof right now, rather than this roof should have been replaced 2 years ago.
No, but I guess, and then I see Mr. Brady's hand now. Let him speak, but I just want to make sure, Mr. Nixon, that we're not missing a capital request, because I've also heard Mr. Lawson at our table talk about endlessly chasing leaks at the Ambrose roof. So I want to make sure that we're not missing a $200,000 request to replace the portions of the Ambrose roof that do actually need to be replaced to keep it solid until we can do that solar work.
Yeah, great point. And what is useful in the report is they're actually identifying there are areas where there are leaks that are not really attributed to a failure of the membrane. It just may be like a sealant joint at a pipe penetration they found that's not closed anymore. So again, kind of maintenance stuff, not like construction document, hire a contractor kind of stuff. So I think it's really useful, and there may be some things that Pete takes away from the report that he may want to go up there specifically and target with his maintenance budget in the coming school year.
Mr. Brady, thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Just on the Lincoln flat work, it's come up before. I certainly understand. It's helpful. It's important. I wonder though, it's $1.5 million. Is there any way we can look at that and say, well, if we do the flat work and we renovate the playground at the same time, that's a lot more attractive project to me, and I would imagine to many people than, if we're spending 1.5 million, why can't we spend a few $100,000 on the playground where the kids actually play versus these are not open pits. No one's going to fall into the center of the earth right now walking around Lincoln. Like, yep, there's trip hazards, whatever, but no one's going to die because of the lack of flat work. So like, we're asking the town to spend $1.5 million to fix trip hazards, and I appreciate that, but at the same time, can we just be a little more innovative and be a little less like checklist kind of? I don't know. I would appreciate if we could at least consider that, because I feel like it's a real missed opportunity. If this is our big project we want done, let's do something that the kids are really going to enjoy. I don't think the kids are going to be dancing around the flatter surface, more walkable surface. So let's maybe try and do that if we can.
I'm dying to make a suggestion. I'm glad you brought this up and you framed it the way you did. If this project gets funded by capital, I think we understand this concept of base bid documents and then add alternates, right? There is no, I believe, there's no reason why we couldn't direct the design team. So it's a civil engineer, structural engineer, but also a landscape architect. So this is sort of in their wheelhouse. We could, for instance, identify the playground and say, replacing this rubberized surface is an add alternate. And we could do that for peanuts because it's just what's on the drawings. Then if the project comes in, under budget, and there's money to do it, then you check that box and say, that's great. So let's go fix that surface. And if we're able to do it, now we only have two other playgrounds we have to figure out, which is, Ambrose and VO. So there really is a way to go about that. I would just suggest that might be the way to do it, only because, and maybe Mr. Marin knows more about it than I don't know what the actual value is of what it would cost to remove and replace that surface. If administration knows what that is, and if you're asking, maybe we bump up that 1.5, maybe it's 1,550,000 or 1,580,000. I don't know. But
sorry, I'm not talking about the survey. I'm talking about adding structures and elements that kids can enjoy, and they're not terribly expensive compared to 1.5 million. Structures can be 20, 30, 40,000. Elements can be as cheap as 5-10,000. So there's a lot that we can do. If we're, again, my point is, if we're spending that magnitude of funding on something that kids can't really enjoy, for lack of a better word, then let's put, we've packaged projects before. We packaged the Morocco roof replacement with the culvert. I think we can package Lincoln flat work with renovating the playground and making it awesome for the kids at Lincoln and all the kids in town, and the kids in surrounding communities. It's a good investment of funds. Not that the flat work isn't, but let's, again, I think that's what I am interested in, if other members of the committee are interested in that.
Ms. Bergstrom?
I agree with Mr. Brady. I had a similar thought, because I believe there is already something we consider an add alternate on this project. While I appreciate that the flat work needs to be done, the trip hazards, the railings to get people safely into the building, I believe there is a site on this project that is simply a paved open space that is designed as an outdoor classroom. And I think, to Mr. Brady's point, swapping whatever the cost of that is for the cost of repairing and replacing the playground at Lincoln would probably be, in the long term, more valuable to the students of the school than a paved open classroom space. I just think it would be much more highly utilized, and I would be willing to consider taking that out of this project, repairing the things that need to be repaired for safety and access reasons, and then creating an accessible playground as part of the project instead.
So I would, defer to the superintendent on that latter suggestion, only because the building-based team, including, the principal, assistant principal, was sort of a part of that discussion. So I would be loath to actually change the design of this. But certainly the idea of like maybe expanding it, right, and maybe increasing what we're asking for to, but I'm certainly not expert in this, so I don't know really what that number would be. But if there's a number, that would be my suggestion would be not to change the design, not to take stuff out that the building-based team has told us is valuable to them and would be helpful. But to Mr. Brady's point, if we'd like to add something to it, if that's something the superintendent supports, I think we could do that. We just need to kind of figure out what that number is, and not actually that maybe we need to vote a number tonight, but if there's consensus among the school committee to add something meaningful that could add some additional equipment. And I just made sure I was clear about this, Mr. Brady, because we're going to be cutting into that. The surface, first of all, is already 22 years old. So I think it's actually getting pretty tired. We're going to have to cut into some of that to make some of those structural connections anyway, like in the short term. My sense is that surface is going to need to be replaced. So, if Mr. Marin could certainly circle back with the playground consultant, we could certainly come up with a number. If you trust administration to kind of figure out what that could be, and then they just add it in, we could do that. I mean, I would be in support of that. I just don't know what that number is, but some modest increase, seems reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I would love that. I mean, I think we could say, I mean, when you talk about playgrounds, people will give you different, opinions, but what I've generally seen is 1,000 per child, right? So if you wanted to do the totality of the playground, you'd take the number of students times 1,000, and that would be a pretty generous number. You don't certainly have to do the max amount, but again, I think it's just trying to seize the opportunity and get people excited about this project, because at the end of the day, it has to pass through, town meeting as it should. So let's give people a reason to vote for it.
Well, it does, but there's an important point too. So, I mean, if you did that math, so now we're looking at like $410,000, which I think would frankly kill the project at Capitol, because we have some funding limits. So we have to balance the needs of projects like this on top of things like fire trucks and ambulances. Our brand new ambulance arrived actually in town 5 hours ago. I think it took 2 or 3 years to get that funded. So it's a big deal if a project is requested at 1.5 versus 1.9. There were actually there were some proponents last night for renovations to the Packer Ellis courts. Big turnout from the Winchester Tennis Association. And just based on the dollar value alone, the chair and vice chair basically said, we don't have that kind of money. So my sense is adding $400,000 to this 1.5 changes significantly the viability of the project funded. But having said that, I think we could still add something to it that could be meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I'd rather let the people decide that than, not the people.
My point is the people won't even get the option at town meeting if Capitol simply says, okay, that project is now too expensive. We're going to pass on that and move down to other things that are cheaper. Because town meeting is only going to vote on those things.
Well, I don't necessarily agree. I mean, people can then reject the projects they put forward and say, we wanted the one that you didn't put forward. So it's, again, it's back to the voters. Capitol can recommend what they want, but Capitol.
Yeah, but they actually can't do that, because that's after the warrant is closed and it's a financial article. So then town council would rule that out of order. So,
I'm saying they can just reject what gets put forward and say, put forward what we wanted next time.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
So that's my point, that, again, the people decide what goes through. Capitol can propose what they want, but they can propose, whatever. So anyways, I think you understand what I'm saying.
I do. And I appreciate the clarification there.
I'm happy to make a suggestion if Chair would allow.
Sure. Go ahead, Dr. Hackett.
So I think that I don't know, and maybe Chris, you do know, but I'm not sure that the Lincoln administration contemplated a playground versus an outdoor classroom during this discussion. They may have, but I am more than happy to go back to the administration to have that conversation. And I just wanted to pick up on a point that Mr. Brady made, I thought, very well earlier in the meeting, and what we have been trying to do, Andrew and I and Pete Lawson, really trying to, obviously we need to explore alternative funding sources. Even if we were able to get this through the Project for Lincoln, we may not be able to get that similar project at Ambrose. So I think it's our responsibility as a school department, as a town, to provide the fundamental base for a playground. I think that, as you said, Mr. Brady, there a lot of excitement can be generated around with parent associations and within the parent community to participate in this with us, and talking about equipment and what can this look like. But whether it's a 1-for-1 swap on the outdoor classroom or not, but certainly now that I'm there, I walk by that playground every single day, and that flat work surrounds that playground, as you know. So it does make a lot of sense for us to try to look at that, if possible, however the funding might happen. I would hope the capital would be interested in at least letting us do that, given that it is kind of the surface is at least associated with a playground. And then, we can begin the work of can we get some energy around this as a project within the parent community.
And to Tom's point earlier too, I do think, Frank, I don't know that outdoor classroom space that's not explicitly carried as an ad alternate. I think the comment was once we got to 100% bid docs, like construction documents, if we felt we needed to, like that's what we would do, because it is seen as sort of a value add. Maybe the right approach is to simply say let's do playground upgrades, and then we just explicitly agree tonight that that outdoor classroom space, that would be nice, but that's the ad alternate. The priority is upgrades to the playground, and I think we can do that in the context of a $1.5 million request.
And I do think the surface of a playground is flat work. I mean, especially when you have to walk down flat work to get to the flat work that is supporting the playground. And I spent a little bit of time looking at it. It seemed, I think they are compatible. Is I guess my point. Projects.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Definitely site work.
It strikes me that if we're replacing the surface of the playground, that we ought to figure out what playground upgrades we want to do first, so we don't have to fix it, get into it, etc. when we add new playground stuff. That said, I do also, so I get that there's some uniqueness to the situation, because it makes sense to do things in a timely manner, and those two things seem linked. At the same time, I think having a plan for all the schools makes sense. And I don't know, if there's a whole design process that we need to do for all these playgrounds, and bidding or financial assessment of how much there's a cost, so that we can do this. But I think it seems to be a priority of the committee, and so figuring out how to get that into the work, so that we're not just doing one school and not the other schools, would be good.
No, totally agree. And you know what? We'll get this slide fixed, and we'll go from there. But I will talk to administration about what their views would be on that. So thank you.
And certainly, I think before we do anything to turn the outside classroom into an ad alternate, it would be great to get input from the building-based leadership.
Absolutely.
So how are people feeling in terms of consensus on the recommendations that have been put forth tonight? Assuming that we work out some of the changes here on the playground, and get the input from the building. Are we directionally in alignment with these recommendations?
I'm fine with it as long as we add an emphasis on playground and playground equipment.
And
we can absolutely do that.
And there's two recommendations here. There's the 1.5 million for Lincoln, and there's the 205,000 for preserving the carriage house for a little bit longer. Seamus, did you have a thought on that?
I'm happy to make a motion that we submit for capital planning's consideration for the FY25 capital cycle 2 projects: the completion of the construction documents and construction of reconstruction of the Lincoln Elementary site work, flat work, and repair, including upgrades to the playground, and the amount of $1.5 million, with the understanding superintendent will speak to the building-based team about how to package the outdoor stuff as an ad alternate. And that our second but lower priority is roof replacement for the carriage house of $205,000.
So I wonder, can we increase it to 1.6? So at least we've given ourselves something there. Are they gonna lose their minds over $100,000?
I think I don't know that they will lose their minds. I just remind the committee last year we said this is going to be between 1.1 to 1.2.
And it started at 800.
And yes, although that was before we even really had design. That was just
I know, but I mean, I think some people, to your point, Chris, I think some people already see this project as having doubled in cost.
Yeah,
the report itself says 1.4 million, so I think the additional money was the 100,000 to get it to 1.5 million.
Well, yes, although again, to be clear, 1.4 was an estimate like 11 months ago. So that's it. We're in effect, we're asking for the same thing because money doesn't go as far as it did then. So that extra 100 is intended to account for things like escalation of cost. And so I would just say sometimes we get lucky, right? I mean, we said to Mr. Mucci in January, a new roof at Ambrose could cost $3 million. And now here's an engineer who comes in who does it all the time and says 3.2. We don't always get that close. So, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, Ms. Bergstrom, somebody said, well, what do you think all the Lincoln work would cost? I think, in fact, what we said at the time was at least 800. I don't think we said it would be 800, but we said at least 800. And boy, howdy, it's certainly at least 800. So, I mean, my preference would be to stick with the 1.5. But I mean, I'm really hearing not just Mr. Brady's, perspective, but I agree with Mr. Hopcroft. There's certainly support of the committee in focusing on the playground. And I think there's a way we can do that. I'm comfortable with this because a key partner on the project is the landscape architect. So if this was just like a civil engineer, I would sort of question if we even had the right team on board, but I have no concerns about that whatsoever with a landscape architect on board.
And I should clarify that the playground that, I'm supportive of including it here, but I'm also saying that separately, for Mr. Brady's suggestions, we should be looking at, all the remaining schools that needed to be upgraded and trying to figure out how to prioritize that as well. So separate and above and beyond this.
I'm just going to remind everybody that this town is still also seeking CPA in the next year. So many of these playground projects and historic projects would fall under the CPA as well. So I think we need, I think as a committee, we need to keep that in mind too, because that would be a huge resource for many projects that we look to seek. So I think taking the time to have a plan for playgrounds and making sure, as I mentioned earlier, that we are also creating equitable spaces. I certainly completely agree in taking advantage of this at Lincoln Elementary, since we have, it seems like site work around the building, including the playground, that needs to be repaired. But I think keeping it at the 1.5, as Mr. Nixon has suggested, is probably the best way to go to get capital support at this time. I think if we continue to increase our project costs, we may not get that support.
Right, and I would suggest that I agree with that suggestion. And that we do as much as we can with the Lincoln Playground as part of this, and that we address the balance of it if we aren't able to do what needs to be done when we address all the playgrounds as part of the longer term view.
I guess I can certainly get on board with that. I would only add that it would probably be worthwhile to start to engage the Lincoln Elementary parents, because again, if we're doing all this work, maybe they're interested in doing something now with the playground. So if
Absolutely.
they hear, oh, if you all raise X, then Y. So it would be good if we could just collaborate with them and keep them updated. And if the committee could be kept updated on, is this actually going to turn it? Is the 1.5 in totality going to get spent just on surfaces, or is that, going to end up being 1.3 and then there's 200,000 to work on equipment? And, I just think there's a lot of opportunity here. So I'm happy to second Mr. Nixon's motion, and just with the fact that I think we need to make sure people understand that
where we are with the carriage house roof and what are the consequences. And I think, Andrew or someone else should hopefully be able to demonstrate what are the costs if, we don't replace the roof and the building collapses and it has to be demolished in an emergency fashion or whatever that, I don't pretend to know what that is, but whatever those steps would have to take, because I think we at least need to lay it out there for folks to understand what the consequence is of doing it or not doing it and the potential costs of not doing it.
And
So that
not
was
a
second as well.
yeah, and not a nebulous, it might be this amount, but we might want to get a better cost on how much it does actually cost to demolish the building. Because that could put the cost of the roof in perspective for people too. So if there is any way to get a real estimate on what it would cost to demolish the carriage house to give people something to compare against it, I think that would be a useful number.
We actually have that.
You had mentioned 95,000, but not I had heard approximately 95,000 for mitigation, but you didn't give us a real.
Oh no, all in, it's actually close. Sorry, it's close to $300,000. I was just saying, just the hazardous material abatement alone, which is a
Right.
2-year-old number, was $94,000. But we do have those numbers from prior estimates.
So the motion is to accept both recommendations.
Yeah, and you had a second from me.
Moved and seconded, okay. And this other discussion is between now and town meeting. So I'll do a roll call since we're on Zoom. Mr. Brady,
Aye.
Bergstrom,
Aye.
Ms. Walnese,
Aye.
Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
the chair votes aye. So you have
Can I just make a comment, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
real quick?
please.
I have to just point out the irony. I've been on the school committee many years. Tonight, we discussed the fewest number of capital priorities we've ever had. And I think this was actually the longest, deepest, most meaningful conversation on capital projects we've ever had. And I mean that sincerely. I mean, I appreciate that Andrew put together the slides the way he did. And I want to thank Ms. Bergstrom because she was really kind of pushing us in the winter to start bringing some of these things forward to the committee when we could, so that we wouldn't be hitting a lot of this stuff cold. And I appreciate that. It was helpful for me. I hope it was helpful for the rest of the committee.
Yeah, no, I think that's a point worth underscoring, and in particular, I think Ms. Bergstrom's practice should be a best practice for the committee. I find it very helpful to get the background over the course of 6 months on these different projects, so that when you pull it all together, it's not so overwhelming in the summer. So I appreciate the teamwork that everyone has put together to make this go so well. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, future agenda items for this summer subcommittee assignments. Those are coming very soon. I just need to have a few more conversations. Performance data, strategic planning and facilities workshop, and superintendent evaluation. Future meeting dates. And Mr. Nixon, do you have a question right now?
Yeah, I just want to. We can't forget about school handbooks. So are we thinking August for that, Dr. Hackett?
Yes, we are.
Do we not have a meeting next week?
Yeah, I was going to ask about that when we get to that item.
Meeting is the 31st, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that should be added to the future meeting dates.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
But did you want to answer that?
Yeah, so to answer the handbook question, we'll have those in August. We may be able to get you a draft of the changes by the 31st for you to look at. They're in good shape overall from our perspective, but I know that there's likely you might want to be having some conversations around some specific things in there that I know that some of you have an interest in. As you've expressed it to me over the course of the year, we do need to, at the elementary level, I think we need some additional language around a few other things too. And including, I think it would be good for us to either in the handbook or not just the handbook, but also elsewhere, get a little bit more specific on our safety and security protocols.
Okay,
Great.
yeah, I just brought it up as a future agenda item. However we pull it together, I do think I feel like it's frankly kind of imperative. We got to get them approved, reviewed and approved, certainly before the start of the school year.
No, absolutely. The good news is in this day and age, we don't have to print them. So that is helpful. And I would say that if any of you do have recommendations or topics that you would like to see us see in the handbooks or have questions about, if you can get those to me over the next week or so, that would be super helpful.
Dr. Hackett, on future agenda items, were we also going to talk about the new health standards?
Yes, ma'am. Although I will say that we've not fully digested them. Erin Kuhn is going to be, she has already been working on them, and we've been talking internally about the implications. Yeah, we could put that on future agenda. I'm thinking maybe kind of August, maybe August is a kind of an overview.
And public comment on those standards, I'll remind committee members, is open. So if individually you want to go take a look at the new health standards and submit feedback on them during the public comment period, certainly as committee members, we are welcome to do so.
A whole lot of SEL in the new standards. So thanks to your efforts and supports, we really are, I think, in pretty good shape that way. But
And our sustainability policy is another thing we'll want to address at some point.
We will, and there's some members of the sustainability subcommittee on the Lynch project that have interest in making some suggestions there. Speaking for myself, but I know some others. We've been a little bit distracted by the never-ending solar evaluation for Lynch, but it remains something we're interested in getting to soon.
Great. All right, future meeting dates are July 31st, which is not on this slide, but just know that that is still a meeting, August 8th and August 29th. And we, let me pause for a moment and just ask, is there anything we haven't covered? Or Dr. Hackett, are we good with district facilities before we close out of this meeting and go into our executive session?
no, I think this has been great discussion.
Yeah, and are we going to adjourn after executive session?
Yes, you will not be coming back in a public session.
Okay. All right. So so at this time, then we will move into executive session for the purpose of conducting a strategy session in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel. I guess I should have said first number 2. And the links, I'm not sure if I haven't looked, but hopefully the links are in our emails. And
We have a link for that.
Yes, Andrew sent out a link a little while ago. It should be near the
Okay.
top of your inbox.
So moved.
Is the link from Andrew or is it from Zoom? Because I'm not sure. I just want to know what to go look for.
Andrew, is it from you or Zoom?
It's from Andrew.
Okay, cool.
From Andrew. And it's a Zoom, Chris.
Okay.
So I had a motion and a second. So Ms. Bergstrom,
Aye.
Mr. Rady,
Bye.
Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Ms. Volnese,
Aye.
and Chair votes aye to go into executive session. So we will see you on the other side.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
Bye.
discussion.